Hello, welcome back. I am so glad that you are here, of course, on the Patient First podcast, as always. And today we have another episode of the ongoing series, Ask Me Anything. These usually come from questions from our VIP community over at Upgrade Dental, and someone comes up with a good question or makes a comment that gets me sparks me thinking about something I should bring here to everybody here at the Patient First podcast, where we're looking to make dentists more profitable, of course. So, somebody saw an older podcast that I did back in 2020. It might have been 2019, actually. I don't remember the exact date of the podcast, where I was talking about during the pandemic, during the shutdown of the pandemic, the need that now was not the time to take your foot off the gas. It was the time to really work on your practice, work hard, make the changes that were required to really push your practice to the next level. And I wanted to, and they were asking, the person asked, well, luckily, I think, I don't know if we're out of it indefinitely, but we certainly are out of this pandemic from the perspective of being shut down, not being able to see patients. All of that has sort of passed, this whole PPP sort of craziness and all that whole world that feels very surreal right now. We're through that, at least for now. Maybe it'll happen again, but at this moment in time, recording this podcast, we're not in this crisis mode that we were in during 2020. And so somebody asked, what time frame are we in now? If that was the time to like really make hay, because during times of crisis, that's where fortunes are made. What is this time frame now? And so it's caused me to do a little bit of reflection on those comments and that time period that I was in. We were all in, and my mindset and everybody's mindset was a little bit different then, but my mindset was definitely got the team together and said, this next 6 months is likely going to determine the next 10 years. And in retrospect, hindsight's 2020. I'm very happy that I took that perspective, and I'll detail out a little bit why now. So, what happened over here because of the actions that we took during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I mean, we did things where we created, car side check-in forms within hours of somebody requesting them. We created the COVID checklist to, when that you had to send to somebody before they came in within hours of that coming out. So the scale greatly, had an exit from that product, Opera DDS. We sold it to Vine, which I still work with right now. I like working them a ton. Great company that had a great exit from, and then we've pivoted and working on Upgrade Dental. We changed the podcast. I wrote a book, the Patient First podcast. So thanks, comes out of the Patient First Manifesto. So if you don't have a copy, we can put a link around this podcast. You can get a copy for free. Lots of things came out of it. Wrote the book, created Upgrade Dental, where we do education, basically keeping dentists up to date with a virtual first format, which is, I think, heavily needed in today's society. We have the VIP plans where you have private access to mentors, and you can get team training for as much CE as you want for $100 a month for your entire team. If you haven't checked it out, go to upgradedental.com. And we started toothapps, which is where really the focus now, where we're launching wide scale in January, but it's came together with the best tech mind in the world. And I say that with, I don't know all of the tech minds in the world, but I know a lot of people. And my co-founder and partner in toothapps is a genius. And we've put together toothapps, which you'll be hearing a lot about. There's so much coming with toothapps, and we're attacking head on what I believe to be the biggest problem in dentistry that no one's aware of: the lack of information accessibility. If you try to get your dental record, good luck. If your patient wants their dental record, good luck. So all of this is coming out of the pandemic, and widely, because I do believe that in crises, that's when there's mindset shifts, when there's opportunities to make big changes. And we did, wrote a book, sold the company that was exploding in a positive way so that I could go after some bigger things. And I'm very glad I did. But what does that have to do with the question that the person asks? Like, where are we in dentistry right now? What kind of time are we in now? Well, I say that because while the crisis may not be over, again, you can't argue that it's a time frame like we were in 2020. Um, and and there many people, I believe, are in a period of denial. You can say that maybe you didn't hit the gas, or maybe you did, but I feel like now that things have gone back to normal, they've kind of gone way too much back to normal in a lot of practices. We've completely flipped back to pre-pandemic practices that we had, even if we found out during the pandemic there were some things that we could have learned from. So, my question for you today is, what learning did you take away from the surreal experience that we went through for the last 3 years? Now, not just ask yourself, what did you learn? But what did your team learn? How has their perspective shifted about dentistry? My guess is they realize they can be making more money or they can go somewhere else. That's the low fruit, the low hanging fruit. That's the table stakes. We all know that. But really ask, how is your team? How have they been affected by the pandemic? My guess is that they are maybe a little bit more in tune with interpersonal connection. Let's put it that way, with team culture. There's a lot of ways, but your team is different than my team, right? How did your team change in response to the pandemic? How did your patients change? What do you think your patients are looking at your practice differently than pre-pandemic? Because I guarantee you they are. Even if we want to bury our head in the sand and wish, oh, I could just practice like it was 2018 again. Well, guess what? We can't. That toothpaste is out of the proverbial tube. We can't go back. Your patients' mindsets have shifted. Have you shifted in response to that, right? What did DSOs, what are large groups doing? Because that's definitely changed. That's been put on rocket fuel. Some DSOs during the pandemic bought more than ever, and others just shut down. And I can tell you right now, the ones that bought more than ever are just rocking right now. And those ones they're looking at, and they are definitely doing this analysis, thinking, how have people changed? How what opportunities have come from this changes? Not what are the problems with these changes, right? What about other competition for dentistry, like travel? Holy man, I went on a trip a couple weeks ago, and I'm going on a couple. Travel's back, baby. I mean, the airports are just crazy. Restaurants are filled again, right? So the question that I'd like to reframe from that I got is, if fortunes are made in crises, what is the time after a crisis? And again, we might not be after the crisis, so please don't send me emails that we're in the middle of the pandemic still. But what I'm saying is that we're leaving this time, or at least we have a moment in time that's very different than we were all wearing masks everywhere. We couldn't leave our houses. We couldn't go to work. I mean, obviously, if you're in dental practice, you couldn't see patients. I mean, that we're not in that period now. So what is the period after the crisis? And I want to, and again, keep in mind from the perspective of, how did everybody's mindset shift? Yours, your families, your team members, your patients, your competition, DSOs, large groups, small groups, those mindset shifts, how does it affect the moment of time we're in right now? Well, I believe strongly we're in a period of weeding out. And I haven't heard this outside of dentistry. Sometimes I listen to other news, but I don't hear that talking about that right now. I think we are in a period of weeding out. If you think about, one of the big crises that I remember is the internet crash, because I'm a tech guy, obviously, right? So, so the internet crash, which was around 1995, right? There was lots of internet companies that were just cranking in 1995. We're talking, you know, mass everybody. You could not be an internet company and not be going up and to the right. But then there was this bubble. There was this crisis, this crash, and we are in a phase, I believe, where there are going to be those that have made the changes and adjusted, and they're going to be thriving, and then the weak will be sorted out. But the ones that are thriving are going to thrive quickly in dentistry, I think. But the ones that are sorted out are going to wither. You're not going to be yanked, because that doesn't happen. We have a pretty recession proof industry. However, it's going to probably be a little bit of either a flat line or a downstream, right? And so what does that look like in dentistry? I think right now it's going to mean that you're going to have more crises than you might have felt during the pandemic, frankly, because there's a bunch of, we couldn't see patients, but a lot of practices just got a bunch of money sent from the government. So it kind of tided you over until we could see patients again. But that's not going to happen in this period of time. If you haven't shifted, you're probably going to have lots of, for example, team turnover, or people just walking in your office saying, I'm going to leave because I can get $5 an hour down the street, right? That is real. That is real in practices right now. Around the middle of this year, there was a study that showed that 50% of team members, 50%, 1 in 2 team members in dental practices was looking to shift to a different practice. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it, but that means that if you have 10 people in your office, statistically, five are looking somewhere else, right? Now, the ones that have made the adjustments will retain their teams. The ones that haven't are going to lose their teams. So if you had turnover, this could be the reason why. It's not the lack of adjustment to the way things shifted during the pandemic. Also, you might go look at your bank account and go, oh my gosh, I was massively productive. Where'd all the money go? Because guess what? Costs have just risen and insurance reimbursements have gone down. And like I just mentioned, wages have gone up. So if you don't know where your money went at the end of the month, you probably haven't made some fundamental shifts that you could have made during the pandemic. We've talked about it here. If you're ever thinking about dropping insurances and and you haven't even evaluated it and you have insurances, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about to look at, right? Patients increasingly asking you for non-clinical conveniences and you're ignoring them, right? People are like, oh, why do I have to fill out a paper form, right? And you're just like, don't worry about it, just fill out the form. Well, they aren't just going to just fill out the form. They're going to fill out the form and then they're going to look for another practice, right? So if you think even the patients are kind of nagging you about some conveniences that you're not looking to do, those are the things that I'm talking about. Why? Well, because like I mentioned, kind of about the changes that happened during the crisis, the 1995 internet crisis. One company that grew out of that, one of a few huge ones, was Google. Right? Not a big deal in 1994, but when there was a crash, that's when the strong get stronger. Right? We're not in the crisis anymore currently, thankfully. Maybe we will again, but frankly, I think if there was another internet crash, Google would have been just fine, right? Same thing if there's another pandemic, God forbid, right? But because we are in a society that has fundamentally shifted. We all know that. I mean, you just look at any kid that didn't go to school for 2 years. Like, I mean, there's just mental health issues off the boards. There's all sorts of downstream problems that have happened from this crisis. There's also downstream opportunities. And in the internet crash, Google fundamentally benefited from that, right? You, your team, your patients, your vendors, our industry has fundamentally changed in ways that we don't even realize right now. And out of these changes from the pandemic, there's going to rise champions. And we're going to see them grow quickly now, I think, over the next couple of years. And others will fall prey to the stagnation and become outdated quickly. The big companies in dentistry, I think there's some big companies that are about to just hit a wall because they're looking back at 2018 going, I wish things were that way. Or they're looking at 2020 going, boy, we're going to change to where things were in 2020. Guess what? That ain't it. Things are shifting currently in response to the way things shifted. And some big companies will go by the wayside, and there's going to be some new winners. There's also going to be those losers. Like I said, there's going to be companies that are going to become the Netscapes. There were lots of Netscapes around: Internet Explorer, Ask Jeeves, pets.com, in the mid 90s that just went away. Nobody's crying for them now because they have Google. Google shifted to the way things were at the time. And because of that, they're a juggernaut right now. Now they might get taken down because they become outdated. At one point, GE owned pretty much every industry, and now GE's just a shell of its former self. I think that's going to happen in dentistry, and I think that's on this practice scale. That's happening slower, but maybe not as extreme, but it's definitely happening. And we see that happening with the growth of DSOs. But there's also huge growth in private practices too for the people that have shifted. So if you have a private practice and you're thinking, boy, I don't know how to compete with DSOs, it's actually fairly easy. It's just shifting your practice to be ahead of the curve versus behind the curve, because it's much easier in a smaller practice to implement the changes that it requires, things like paperless forms, things like data, just the analytics for your practice, because you don't have this huge organization to roll things across. And the DSOs just typically aren't that sophisticated to roll things out, and they have the challenge of creating consistencies across, sometimes the entire country, whereas you do not. So, but you don't feel it every day like you did during the crisis. You don't get shut down, right? But every day there's patients, there's team members who are weeding out the weak and going after the strong, right? So staying up to date right now is crucially important. It's not, you don't have to have, I don't think you have to have your foot on the gas as hard as when we were shut down, frankly. That was more of a call to action, but I also do believe, I benefited, like I said, greatly from just putting my foot all the way down on the accelerator in the crisis. Can actually let up a little bit now, but it's important to consistently make these changes. And so keep listening every week. That's one of the things I'm trying to do here at the Patient First podcast, is keep you aware of these changes, because ultimately these changes are what patients want, right? That's how we're shifting our practice to be more convenient, more patient friendly, because ultimately that's what's going to lead to a happier team, a more healthy practice, right? You can join Upgrade Dental, other online education. It's free and easy to get education online. That can be massively valuable. At Upgrade Dental, we talk a lot about increasing your profitability, your team performance, getting more new patients. And if you need the tools to get your practice ahead, the easiest way to do it is to go to toothapps.com. I mean, we've just made it stupid simple to get ahead of the curve by signing up for Toothapps. So thank you very much. Enjoyed this podcast with you. Thanks for the question. Kind of went on a little soapbox about it because I think it's a huge issue. I think in a lot of practices where people are burying their head and they wishing that things were like they were pre-pandemic. Obviously, we all do. I don't want to wear a mask when I'm on a plane. I don't. I like going to restaurants, maybe a little too much. I like doing things like that, but practice should have shifted for your teams, for your patients, for the industry, so that you can thrive in this in quotes, post-crisis era. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to talking with you next week right here on the Patient First Podcast.